Welcome to another interview episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. This is part 4 of my interview with industry legend Graeme Bayless. If you haven't already listened to the previous episodes, you're missing out on some amazing stories about industry titans like Accolade, SSI, and Sierra, to say nothing of my favorite studio, Dynamix. So, go back, check those out, and also our previous episode where we talked about his work at EA on the Madden series and starting the NFL Street series. So, last place that we left off, he was about to head out to greener pastures over at Crystal Dynamics, and that's exactly where we're going to be picking up today. Also, before I start the show, obviously, subscribe. Helps support us by following us on the socials. Let everybody know that you like the show. Leave a comment. And if you can, please consider supporting us on Patreon. It's just $1 a month. It's more of a make us feel nice type of thing. Okay? And now, on with the show.
Anyway, so
where we left off was the experience at EA, NFL Street 2.
Right.
And you were going to be leaving EA.
Oh, right. And I went to Crystal. Crystal Dynamics. Yes. Okay.
So, and I don't believe we talked about the specifics of why Crystal.
Well, the short answer is, the short and funny answer is because they offered me the job. I mean, no, that's not quite fair. There's more to it than that. But, I think I went over this with you before, is that there were, that was when I was shopping around at that point. I talked to a number of studios in between joining EA, where I talked to Ensemble and they turned me down. And then after EA, I talked to Microsoft, and I talked to Activision, and I talked to, a lot of different players. And Crystal basically had a situation that felt like it was right in my wheelhouse. And, obviously it's a, big franchise and so forth, but it felt like they had problems that I knew how to solve. And that was appealing to me, right? Moreover, they were willing to do the thing that was one of the things that drove me from EA, right? When I talked to you about my departure from EA, one of the things I highlighted is that it felt like, I wanted to have a seat at the table, and I kind of didn't get one. And it was clear that I wasn't going to. And so I was like, okay, well then, I'm going to talk to some people, and they absolutely were willing to give me that. They the job was going from development director or supervising producer, which I think was a level that they made up for me. It was like, well, you're above this, but you're not that. You're not executive producer, so we'll call you a supervising producer. Okay. But they were willing to make me director of production, which is basically you're running the production group, and I would have EPs reporting to me and so forth. And I'm like, okay, this is not only a seat at the table, but an opportunity to, be involved in the fundamental decisions that hopefully shape the direction we're going. That's what I'm looking for. I had just gotten through a long stint of dealing with situations where decisions were made that had heavy influence on my career path and my team's health and a whole bunch of other things that I had no ability to influence. And so this was an opportunity to have an opportunity to influence it. So I was very eager for that. Little did I know. And this is not in any way a slam on Crystal Dynamics. I'll pause and I'll say this. I was under an illusion at this point in my career that the further up the food chain you got, the more ability you had to control your own destiny. That is a fallacy. In fact, it is a complete fallacy and a poor assumption. But I did not have a frame of reference, and I did not know. I'll steal a bit that probably would have come up. Well, probably would come up at the end of this session, but I'll speak about it now because it's relevant to this. At 2K, I was interviewing a technology director. I'm not going to name him right now. I guess I will later. He's a friend of mine. But I was interviewing this guy, and I'm looking at his resume, and it's like CTO, CEO, all this stuff, and he's going to come be my tech director. I'm like, what? What? How you built your own companies, and what? Why are you talking to me? And I will never forget this. He looked at me, and he was like, and he looked me right in the eye, and he's like, look, I've had your job. I don't want your job. Your job sucks. If you make me do your job, I'll quit. and I'm like, okay, right? At the time, I didn't have that frame of reference. I didn't understand this. So I still had this desire to, stop being punched in the face by bad decisions of other people and have an opportunity to, look, if I'm going to screw up, I'd rather it be my screw up and I can own it. And it's on me, but at least it was my decision. I'm not just dealing with decisions other people make. So one of my aspirations was to move up the food chain to where I had enough ability to control my own destiny. So that was part of what led me to Crystal, to answer your question. I chose to join them because they had a product that was in trouble. It was a little bit off rails. They had some, they had problems. They had organizational challenges. They had, a few too many cooks in the kitchen challenges. And they had this massive IP that needed to get out the door. And I had done that a lot, right? Even going back to my time at Dynamix, other Dynamix. Where I had, helped get Star Siege out the door and helped get other products out the door. I had a specific expertise with what I have later come to call closing. I'm a very good closer, right? I am very capable when we're down to the final part of a project to focusing in and doing triage and going, that's important, that's not important. We can put that aside, but we have to deal with this. And getting everybody on the same page and getting everybody moving so that we can close a product. And so, and with the expertise that I'd gained in project management from my time at EA, because that was basically what my job was there, combining those two things together, it felt like a natural fit. I liked the people. They're very good folks. I'm still friends with some of them, many of them. And have a very good relationship with almost all of them, and so it was a good situation, right? And so I came in there, became their director of production, and Tomb Raider Legend was in development, and it was substantially late. It was supposed to already be not only an alpha but on its way to beta, and it wasn't even close to alpha at the time I stepped in the door. It was like there was a lot of content there, and there was a lot of moving parts, but it wasn't pulled together in any fashion. And so, for me, it became a question of sort of putting on that firefighting hat and trying to help, apply some organization to the organization. And I don't want to overstate that, because actually the GM was very organized and very good at doing sort of high-level production planning, staffing planning, that sort of thing. And we worked well together in regards to that. But there was tactical stuff that needed to be resolved in getting the team sort of together and moving correctly. There was a lot of communication breakdown. There was a lot of, basically, as I mentioned, too many cooks in the kitchen. There was a design director or multiple people who were functionally wore the hat of lead designer or design director that had different sort of strengths, and so it was a question of doing basically some editing and trying to figure out, what the best use of, people's time was, how best to organize the team. And so I did what I usually do. I came in, I listened, I studied, I learned, I came to understand sort of what was working, what wasn't working, and did that as quickly as I could over the span of a few weeks. And then I started making some changes. I changed how communications took place. I changed how teams would, I even moved people around, right? We started creating effectively Tiger Team settings where, people would sit together, cross-discipline, and people working on a specific facet of the project were all co-located and working together on that facet of the project. We rearranged some responsibilities. We sliced off specific responsibilities for the secondary SKUs to a specific producer, and they ran those. And the design director, who was more of a high-level visionary but less of a tactical person, I rotated him onto the next project so that effectively, hey, you're fantastic at that. Please go do that again over there so we can finish this here. That sort of thing. And I had a really good team, fantastic people. So it was really just a question of kind of applying them in the right places and then getting my hands out of their way and letting them do their thing, right? So I would, get I put together a leads meeting that they hadn't really had before, and then got that going. And then I stepped back. I probably attended the first 3, and then I tapped out and let them do what they needed to do, that sort of thing. And it was successful. I like I said, I pushed certain people into the limelight to sort of do their thing and gave them an opportunity to really sort of take charge of their elements, and sort of delineated who had what. And then I let them do their thing. And it was successful. Product sort of solidified despite some of the challenges that no project should ever have to face. I'll tell you this story because it's funny, and it's one of the ones that I often quote to people. So I don't know if you know this, and I'm going to blaspheme here, so please bear with me. But God hates game developers, and I don't know if you know that. I don't know why God hates game developers, but God is not fond of game developers. And I now can prove this because of what happened for us at Crystal on Tomb Raider Legend. The night we're supposed to turn beta, the night we're literally supposed to complete it that evening, and we're going to be at full beta and ready to, go into finaling. There's a storm in the Bay Area. Lightning hits a tree behind our building, sets it on fire, and drops the power lines to the building into the parking lot. So I literally walk out the back of our now dark building. Everybody lost power because, we weren't sophisticated enough to have. We had some systems with battery backup systems, but and that kept all the engineers up and so forth and so on. But that only takes you so far, and then eventually, save off, and that's all you can do. I walk out of the building, and there's a tree on fire and power lines across the parking lot. If that's not a sign, I don't know what is. and so, of course, we contact, the PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, which is the power company. And they're like, hey, you're a business. Sorry, residences come first, which I totally get that. So they basically told us, it may be a week or two before we get your power back. And so what ended up happening is, again, this phenomenal team, they scrambled like crazy and effectively started taking machines home and building virtual networks, and they basically got it done, despite the fact that the Almighty sort of put his thumb in our eye. So, but anyway, so the project came together, and we got Legend done. It went out the door, obviously late from the original plan, but it was on target for the plan that after about 4 weeks there, I said, we can hit this date. And then we aligned everything against that and we hit it. Go ahead.
Sorry. So going back to some of the structural problems there, because Legend is the first Crystal Dynamics developed Lara Croft.
It is. Yes.
This was after Core loses the property and so on and so forth.
Yes, very good. And interestingly, one of the challenges and bonuses, to be fair, is that we had Toby Gard, who is the original, designer, creator, there, right? So he was on site. He was a member of the team. He was a little, it was kind of fuzzy what his role was. But he was certainly a great resource. And so, keep in mind, we also had a design director who was sort of creating this overall vision. And those two both sort of had, at times, competing visions of what they wanted to do. And then we had designers on the team working on tactical components of the systems. And so, that was part of the types of challenges I had to face, is to deal with personalities, deal with differing opinions in regards to what was important. Example. So one of the challenges we had was having a marketing department that, like every other marketing department ever invented, wanted to lean into the sexuality of the
TNA. We can call it the TNA.
The TNA of the Lara Croft character. And Toby Gard was very much a vehement defender of, no, that is not this character, right? And I think we ended up with a pretty reasonable happy medium, but it was a fight, right? It was a constant sort of wrestling to try and find the right note between, what marketing would like to be able to do and what the team wanted to do for the integrity of the IP, the integrity of the product. And that sort of thing happened a lot, right? There were disagreements internally with the team. There were, differences in vision. I'll be honest, we had plenty of, internal struggles and even shouting matches occasionally as we tried to get through some of those problems, dealing with everything from, like I said, the nature of the character to story components to things like the whole. So did you play the game at all? Are you familiar with the motorcycle sequence?
I remember watching trailers for it. I read all the reviews for it because I had been a fan of the Tomb Raider series early on. But unfortunately, this landed right around a period of time when my career as a lawyer just prevented me from doing almost any gaming.
I get it. I can see that. I understand completely. My mom wanted me to go down that path and become a lawyer, and I did not.
If it's any consolation, my dad was pissed at me for like 3 years after I decided to become a lawyer. He wanted me to be a doctor, so it's just one of those things.
Well, there you go. So anyway, effectively, there was disagreements tactically within the team, right? And it was just a question of a lot of tactical problem solving, of getting people to align on things where there was sometimes misalignment. And that's okay. That's something I'm good at, right? I'm generally very good at hand-holding teams and finding ways to find common ground and breaking down barriers so that teams can find ways to work together successfully. And that was very, very applicable here, because while there was a ton of talent on the team, there was a dizzying array of points of view and levels of experience and all these other things. And this was my first experience sitting in that chair, and I knew instinctively that it was imperative that I find the way to weave those threads together if this project was going to get out the door.
Now, you said when you got there, it was it wasn't quite yet at an alpha stage.
It was not.
Now,
yeah.
This is a big product, lots of assets, different scenarios, but it's also a relatively story-driven product.
Very
lots
much
of
so.
Cutscenes, lots of dialogue. Well,
it's story-driven, but also, I mean, you know what Tomb Raiders are, right? So there's puzzle.
Linear.
Yeah, it's a puzzle game, it's a story game, and it's an action game, right?
Yeah.
So it was all of those three, and in fact, intentionally so, trying to very much balance those pieces. Exploration is a piece, puzzles is a piece, action is absolutely a piece, and they all have to work in harmony. That was part of the discussions we would often have is trying to find that right note so that no one piece dominates in the wrong place, so that it feels like their harmony is excellent between them.
Yeah. But when I was thinking more from the production schedule standpoint, I mean, when you have cutscenes or in between sequences or set pieces already planned out, and then you have these issues of, how to portray Alara and so on and so forth. How much wiggle room do you have at that stage of the product to make changes to those elements?
Good question. Short answer, you have to get creative sometimes. Truth be told, it's not difficult to make adjustments tactically to those types of content. It's something that can be done, and it's just a question of editing. There was some rework that was necessary within those parameters, but truth be told, the team was largely leaning towards the vision that Toby had. So it was not really a problem because we could always TNA it up in marketing materials, right? And so it's less about, hey, let's TNA it up in the game. It was more about, here's the game. You find ways to do what you need to do, but we're going to throw flags if you try to go too far, is perhaps a better way to think of it.
Okay. Interesting.
But we still did make plenty of changes to content, less about that particular issue. The content changes really had more to do with what I was talking about a second ago, which is trying to find the right balance, trying to make sure that puzzles were intuitive, trying to do good use of visual language so that players sort of got a sense of what they were supposed to do, so that the game was intuitive and playable, all those types of things. That kind of editing is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No, definitely. And going back to the issue of this being Crystal Dynamics' first take on the series.
Yes.
Obviously, new game engine and so forth. So a lot of the original assets from the PlayStation and the other PlayStation 2 game couldn't be taken over. But was there, or better said, how do you, with a new team and a new company, obviously you had Toby there, but his vision for the character already didn't exist in the first released game. How deep is the consideration of how do we appeal to the old fans, reinvent it for new fans, and keep the IP true to what has come before?
Honestly, I don't want to say that's easy because it wasn't, but that it was relatively easy for the team because they all kind of were in alignment on that. That was probably the points of least contention, right? Everybody kind of was aligned in regards to how they wanted to approach that. And one of the things that made the Crystal games, at least the ones I worked on, and actually to some extent the ones beyond, what made them sort of hit that note correctly is that the team had a good, they spent a lot of time understanding the history of the IP, right? They really deep dived into it. Understand that, you look at some of the other work that Crystal had done, right? This is the team that did Legacy King, right? So they had a good understanding of how to make a game sort of that had that type of feel, right? And they really were committed to understanding the IP deeply. Toby was on board. He was there to be a representative for it. And he contributed, massively to that effort. And so ultimately, that part really wasn't a challenge for the team. They knew, I mean, we'll talk about it in a second, because one of the next projects we worked on was Tomb Raider Anniversary, where they went back and tried to basically redo Tomb Raider 1 with modern sensibilities. And one of the things that we learned while doing that product, well, not while doing that product, but that we applied to that product, having learned it, is that the old games, fantastic, but there was plenty of room for improvement with those old games. I mean, Tomb Raider 1 had long sections of, for lack of a better term, tedium, right? Unnecessary tedium.
I remember those well.
There you go. And so one of the things that the team really had a vision of trying to do on Legend was to ensure that the pacing was right? That everything felt like it was consequential, and everything felt like you were pulled in and then moved along, and that you had an opportunity to you had real ability to influence the sort of the flow of the story. All of that was done with intentionality, and that was based on learning sort of what worked and what the heart of the IP was about. And that's how they came with this sort of focus on really understanding the balance between, like I said, exploration, puzzle solving, action, story, and making sure that all those pieces meshed well so that the game was cohesive, so that it wasn't, oh, it's just a puzzle game with trappings, or, oh, it's just a story and yeah, there's puzzly things, but it's really just a story game. And it's not the only time I've encountered that challenge. And actually, a lot of what I learned on Tomb Raider, I applied to later projects where I came to understand the importance of that type of balance and applied it downstream.
Gotcha. So the product goes out, and here we're talking about Legends. Is the idea of doing Anniversary already in the air, or is that purely just a result of the success of Legends?
Yes, but that's not only it. So one of the big things that goes down while we're finishing Legend, mind you, is the sale of Eidos. So while we were working on it, we're under the very strong impression that we were going to be sold to Elevation Partners. Elevation Partners was a group put together by John Riccatello, and he was looking to put us together with other companies that he was, that he had under his fold, and was going to package us together into this, new super company sort of thing. And we were going to be a part of that. Eidos was going to be a part of that family. And he came by many times, and, we had lots of discussions. We did Dog and Ponies, the whole bit. At the 11th hour, we got pulled out from under him by a little company called SCI. SCI was what I would call C-tier publisher in the UK, focused on doing low budget shooters that they pumped into Walmart and the like. And they built them cheap and they sold a lot of units, so they made a fair amount of money doing it. And if it sounds like I'm not being complimentary to SCI, that's on purpose. And so SCI basically came in with a better offer, but their offer was basically stock, right? So they outbid using their inflated stock price, and bought Eidos out from under Elevation Partners. So ultimately, Elevation Partners became what was the studio that eventually died? Pandemic, and BioWare, right? And so.
Oh, sorry. I just looked up SEI. This is the sales curve. Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know they were still around by that point.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I know them from the 80s.
This is what killed them. So this is indeed what led to their demise. So SEI bought Eidos and became the bosses. And before we know it, now we have a whole new set of executives who have come on over to take over managing the Eidos business, and by virtue of that, managing us. And so relationships started rocky, but it got much happier as soon as we got Legend out the door, because suddenly there was money flowing in and everybody was happy. Led to some awkward moments, like the president of SCI getting drunk at the launch party and literally kissing the ass of my lead producer.
Literally,
I swear to God, there's photographic evidence of her smooching him on the butt.
Okay.
So anyway, it was an interesting, change, but we went through it. We pushed through it. But one of the outcomes of that was the inevitable question of, we like money. What can we do that will, make money? And so there were a lot of things floated and dialogues, and Tomb Raider Anniversary was effectively the thing that we've seen many companies do, right? It's now we have terms for things like the remaster. Tomb Raider Anniversary was an attempt to do a very inexpensive rebuild of Tomb Raider 1 with modern sensibilities for cheap so that we could make money. And it was an external development project. We had two internal teams. They went on to move on. One was moving on to the main next project, which is Tomb Raider Underworld. And the other team was working on a new IP that unfortunately never saw the light of day, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And so Tomb Raider Anniversary was basically a tiny team of like half a dozen people in studio, and then an external team. And that was it. And the focus of that was basically to take Tomb Raider 1 and compress it into a tight, game that sort of hit the high notes of Tomb Raider 1 and left out all the chaff. At least that was kind of the vision. To the credit of the team, I think they actually did a pretty good job of what they were asked to do. It is a competently done example of that type of a thing. It didn't blow off the shelves, but it certainly made money. And it was useful from the standpoint of it gave us an opportunity for some experience with working with external partners, some leadership opportunities for some people on the team who needed an opportunity to have those leadership opportunities. I think all of the leadership, all of the leads from that team have gone on to successful careers as leaders in their field. And so it was it was good for the studio from the standpoint of being a growth experience for the studio and something that would allow us to generate revenue while we were beginning to work on these other projects.
Now, your role, I can imagine your role with a studio that's in-house. So, you're looking over things, meeting with people. When you're dealing with an external studio, now you've got physical distance. You don't have the same personal relationships. How do you change your approach to the job given those circumstances?
So I'll give you two answers to that. The reason I say that is because there's the answer to how do you do that, and then there's the answer to how did I do that in this case. And the reason I say they're different is because I was the director of production, so I wasn't the one hands-on with the external developer day-to-day managing them. My job was to manage the senior production staff. So I had somebody who was responsible for that relationship, and I was their manager. It's
Gotcha.
important. It's an important distinction because that's a different challenge, right? The challenge for me was learning how to manage a manager successfully, right? Learning how to give them the right amount of leash and the right amount of authority and the right amount of autonomy, but also the right amount of support, the right amount of guidance, the right amount of backup, right? And that's very important and a very different job, right? But yeah. Coming back to the question you asked about how do you do that, it is a different, a very different type of management, as you would imagine, as you have surmised, right? When you're managing an internal team, you have constant contact. You're deeply embedded with them. You understand what's happening. You understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the team. When you're dealing with an external developer, you're kind of so removed that you don't have that sense of detail. You don't have the ability to sort of get all that understanding. And so you have to depend on building a relationship with certain members of that team so that you can have success managing them to accomplish the tasks. So it is similar in that it's still management, but it's a different type of management. And it also depends to some extent on the relationship you have with the developer, who they are, what the contract looks like, right? I have had to manage external partners that, or external developers where I had all the cards. And so I had the entire tool chest in my disposal where I could turn the screws on them in any way I wanted to, including canceling their project. And then I've had others where I had no power whatsoever, where I literally had to, through persuasion, get them to do the things I wanted them to do because for whatever reason, they were not beholden or they already had been paid up front or any number of reasons, where I had less ability to influence the outcomes. And I need to be a great deal savvier about how I get them to do what I want them to do. And so all of those factors sort of play into what that management looks like. But ultimately, it comes down to spending the time necessary to understand what they're good at and what they're not as good at, and then working with them on leaning into their strengths and finding ways to support their deficiencies, whatever they may be, whether that be getting them additional help or, who knows, in some cases, changing the nature of how you're approaching the product so that you're leaning away from the things that they're not good at and leaning into the things that they are good at. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, did you have any part in the choice of these outside teams, or do they have a previously existing relationship with Crystal Dynamics?
Yes, I had a part in that because I got that seat at the table. So I was in the conversations, but I was not the decision maker. I just had the ability to sort of share my thoughts and so forth. It was a developer we had some experience with, but not one that we had done a project with. So it was a new experience for us. They had just been purely outsourcing before. Now they were co-dev, right? So it was definitely a step up.
Gotcha. So now you mentioned a project that began work but didn't get completed.
Yes. Yeah. So we had an additional team, and that team was working on a completely different kind of game that was the internal code name for it was called Downfall, and it was led by a very talented executive producer who then went on to become the head of studios for 2K, very talented guy by the name of John Chawanek, and his extremely talented team of leads. They were working on what I would describe as a sort of a zombie is not the right word because it wasn't zombies, it was like monsters. But effectively, the premise was, massive earthquake opens up in San Francisco. Really bad things come out, and they come out at night, and they're afraid of light. And so it's a little bit of Alan Wake and a little bit of,
I Am Legend.
Yeah, a little bit of that. And it was fantastic. They had some really great tech going. They had some really interesting ideas. But it wasn't there yet. It was building, it was germinating, it was becoming. I actually still have a build disc around here somewhere of the last build of the game. But that was in development. And then Tomb Raider Underworld was in early development. And then we were working on Anniversary. And that's when the relationship with SCI started to get not great. So first out of the gate, they started becoming a little bit, sort of pushy because they were very, very motivated by get me cash fast. What we learned is that they were driven by that because their entire plan was to sell us. They never wanted to keep us. Their whole idea was to oscillate the stock price and sell us for a profit, and then go sit on the beach in Ibiza with their toes in the sand. Which I guess would be great if you could pull that off. So they started making every decision based around how can we cut costs, how can we make revenue, and that's all that we care about. And that soured pretty quickly, right? It became transparent relatively quickly. The team is a team of very smart individuals, so it became pretty quickly apparent what was happening. And so that led to some additional sort of side projects that they took on that I had very little to do with, but we actually did the externally developed the 50 Cent game. And yeah, that one. It led to a serious rift with the team, which really became a problem very quickly. We started to find ourselves in a position where you could begin to see the writing on the wall. Probably the linchpin event was when we got into a large meeting with the executives from that group, and their head of sales, I think it was, I won't name his name, yelled at my lead producer who did Tomb Raider Legend, and basically said to him, "Shut up. I don't want to hear what you have to say. You're a sausage maker. Shut up and make sausage."
Whoa.
And not surprisingly, he did not take that well. And it was everything I could do to get him to not quit that day. But the writing was on the wall at that point. The moment that happened, the team was like, we're all done. And people were sending resumes and, and so, yeah, basically at that point, I started sending my resume out too. It was like, oh boy. And so, I was there for not quite 2 years, right? I did finish Legend, got Underworld going, got Anniversary, and then this started to happen. And I'm like, I don't want to ride this into the crater because that's where we're headed. Now, hindsight's 2020. As it turns out, 6 months after I left, the entire board, the entire management structure was all fired. And SCI basically cratered, and we know the rest of that story. That happened after I left, but not long after I left. So if I had just hung on, I probably would have ended up, as studio head or something. And who knows what that future would have looked like. But I left, and a lot of other people left. and it started to come apart pretty quickly. To the great credit of the people that stayed, and the studio head ended up becoming, suddenly his name escapes me, but he ended up, he was the art director and ended up driving the ship at one point. But there was great people that stayed, and they got Tomb Raider Underworld out the door, and to their great credit. But the wheels were coming off while they did it, and I'm very impressed with them that they managed to wrap it as they did. So yeah, that was the end of my time at Crystal. By the way,
while you were there, and you mentioned the Legacy of Kain series, Soul Reaver series, which that was basically the end of my active gaming time before the career took off. I devoured those games.
Sure, fantastic games.
Was there any attempt to revise that? I remember rumors at the time of some kind of online version of Nazgaroth, but
many times. That was a dialogue that happened many times, and I think to this day, those people, that team would probably have reformed just to do it, because they were very passionate and incredibly talented group. So yeah, I mean, I know all those people, and actually some of them are still on my Facebook, and some of them still talk about it, about getting together to try and revive the franchise. So yes, 100%, there was plenty of discussion about doing that. It was never viable for one reason or another, but it was something that always they wanted to do, without any question. And yeah, they're as sad as everybody else. Trust me, that never manifested.
Yeah, no, I just remember getting to the end of Defiance and those last sequences, and when you find out, it's the same, the sword, and it was one of those emotional moments with a game series that just grabs you with the story, and you're in it. Sorry.
Yeah. So no, that was it was a great project. I wish I'd been involved, but it wasn't me.
No, I know, but you were there behind the scenes, so unfortunately, yeah. Okay, so you decide to leave what appears to be a sinking ship.
Yes,
it is a sinking ship, but it's going to end up. It's going to make it to another harbor, but without you.
It is, and without me. And that begins what I will refer to as my decade of peril. It then entered into a very, very volatile time in my career. So I left Crystal, and so remember when we talked about recruiters before and how I had a network of these people and good relationships. So one of those people reached out to me about a opportunity to run a startup studio up in Canada. Okay. And they wanted to take the studio that had previously worked on, licensed stuff and a sort of C-tier shooter and all this other stuff, but they really wanted to assemble a team and take a swing at doing a AAA game. And they wanted me to come up, he wanted me to come up and talk to him and see if I could do this. I'm not going to spend time on this because it didn't last long, but I'll say this. I said yes. I moved to Canada in the winter to Toronto. And within a few weeks, realized I'd made a horrible, horrible mistake. Because very quickly, it became apparent that they didn't really know what they wanted to do because they kept changing. They're like, oh, wait, okay, hold on. Now we're going to do a gambling platform. And we're going to do like competitive shooter, except you can gamble on it with real money, right? It was literally like, what? And so the company was formed and run by a pair of attorneys and who were passionate gamers, but didn't really know what the heck they were doing. And so, yeah, very quickly it was apparent that I had made a horrible decision. And so, it was maybe 2 months, I think. And then I'm like, I'm out of here. I didn't have a job. I was just like, sorry, I gotta go. This is not for me. This is not I'm not your guy. Whatever it is you're doing, I'm not your guy for this. And they're like, come on, please stay. And I'm like, no. And so I literally left without a job. I will tell you a funny story from that, though, just because I've told this story to a few people and it makes me laugh. So their CTO was a former Russian crypto analyst. Now, if you know what that means, you know what that means.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. I'm definitely not naming names. So he and I, we meet and he's like, we should go to dinner. And I'm like, that's a great idea. Let's get to know each other. And this is like, a couple weeks after I'm there. So we go to dinner and we're just chatting, right? And he's like, so tell me about yourself. Tell me what you did, before you got into computers. And I was like, well, I was actually a warplanes programmer in the United States Air Force. He's like, oh, really? Tell me about this. I was like, well, it's literally that. I wrote code that made sure that our missiles and bombers didn't end up in the same place at the same time. I worked in the fratricide branch, and I worked on our attack database. He's like, very interesting. I was what you would call a missile control officer on I think you called them Delta-class submarine. And I'm like, okay, so that's like the, guy with the thing, launched the missiles. He's like, yes. And he looks at me with a straight face. He goes, I think it is very good none of us got to do our jobs. I'm like, wow, that's a hell of a dinner. So anyway, it's just a good story.
It's
so anyway,
very good story.
I punch out of this place after literally 2 months. I don't have a job. I have, a wife in Canada. We're living in a rented place in the middle of the winter. We're like, So I put out feelers, and I got a call on Thursday, I think, before President's Day weekend, I think it was. Sounds right? Something like that. And the call is from 2K and is from Christoph Hartmann. And Christoph is like, hey, we just lost our president for Cush Games in Southern California, does the baseball and hockey games for 2K. You've done sports games. We like your background. And we need somebody to go and take over that studio. Would you be interested? And I'm like, sure, let's talk. So he flies me out to New York the next day. And one interview, he offers me the job. I accept. So by Tuesday Tuesday, President's Day, I'm now employed by 2K. And he basically said, get your butt to Southern California and you're going to, be the head of 2K, Cush Games, which is 2K Southern California. So I was like, okay. So I packed up a U-Haul and off we go. And so moved down to Southern California, stepped in as the general manager of this little studio of, 60 people. They're mid-stride working on the next baseball product and the next hockey product. They have a pair of EPs, one over each. And, basically a shared team on some stuff, but basically two teams doing these two games simultaneously. And, got in there, got my feet wet, and then about, I want to say, a couple months after I get there, 40 people leave all at the same time. Turns out that the president did not retire. The exiting president did not retire. In fact, what he did was he went off because he got an offer for a bunch of money from, I want to say it was Sony or one of to spin up a new entity in town. And he basically took half the studio with him, and that was it. And so suddenly, half the studio leaves in a week and goes to this other company. And I got products to ship. So what went from being an interesting transition became a significant challenge overnight. And so I scrambled like crazy. I hired like crazy. That's where I hired that CTO to become my tech director that I talked about briefly before, and hired a new art director, hired a new tech director, hired all my new tech artists because I didn't have any anymore, all that stuff. It was just literally like, hey, new team. And they had to find a way to work with the existing team that was still there and integrate it and pull them all together. And wow. I'll be blunt, this is also my first job as a GM. So I'm still figuring out how to do the job right. And that was an interesting time. The old Chinese curse about living in interesting times?
Yeah.
That was an interesting time.
Was this then MLB 2K8 or 2K7?
This would have been 2K7. 2K7. Because it came out, it was in 2007 when I joined them. So it would have been 2007 when it shipped. And it was MLB 2K7. And likewise, I think hockey would have been then 2K7 as well, or 2K8. I can't remember which ones used the next year. But that was a absolute mad scramble. Once again, the good news is that there were some really talented people left behind. There were some others that I managed to contract. I managed to bring on board somebody who did effectively a direct port of. So remember, I talked before about the challenges of the era for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox at that time, and how difficult that infrastructure was because those two were far apart. Yeah, I basically hired an engineer to port the Xbox to the PlayStation, and he's amazing, and he pulled it off and basically got that across in just ridiculous short amount of time. But anyway, we got those products out the door on time. Miraculously, again, the people that remained were fantastic. We hired some really talented people to join them. So I was very, very fortunate that those teams were so strong. They shipped the games in time. We started talking about what's next. And so I go up to have a conversation with Christoph and David Ismailer up at 2K. At which point Christoph is like, hey, we're not comfortable with 2K, now branded 2KLA. We're not comfortable with 2KLA being out there isolated like that. We're worried about the vulnerability of a studio there. He's there in town, worried about poaching. So we want to integrate the sports studios all together. And I'm like, okay, let's figure that out. So I managed to convince the bulk of the team to actually move to Northern California. I'm relatively proud of that. And we started looking to consolidate the sports labels up there, and I was going to run them. But Greg Thomas, head of visual concepts, did not really keen on that idea. And he wanted to own it, not me. And so effectively, he demanded that it be under him or else. And Christoph was like, and I tend to be the flexible guy, so I did what I usually do and said, hey, man, if that's what's best for the company, do what you got to do. So he's like, well, take care of you. You're fine. That's good. We'll do this. And, so we wrapped all of the 2K Sports labels under him. And he's like, what we'll do with you is we'll spin you up a new studio in the Bay Area. We want you to take the Darkness franchise. Do you remember the Darkness?
Yeah.
We want you to turn it into a franchise. We'd like you to do Darkness 2 and spin up a team to do it. Now, remember that team that I told you about working on Downfall?
Yeah.
They're at this point ready to out of Crystal because their project just got canceled. So I'm okay. All right. So I basically, poach is not the right word, but I effectively go to them and say, hey, they killed your project. Why don't you all come over here and we'll spin up this thing together? And Jan agreed, and I got every principal member of the team, the art director, the design director, the lead engineer, the whole team was on board. They're like, this is great. We're in, we're ready to come up. They all came up, they interviewed, I even rented a house or rented an apartment. We found a property to spin up the studio in. You can probably see where this goes.
Oh, yeah.
Because literally about a month before we were going to basically move into the premises, EA attempts a hostile takeover of Take-Two.
Okay.
Now, if you know what that means, one of the ways you defend yourself against a hostile takeover is well, first of all, you stop all development, right? You stop all expansion, you stop all of that junk. And then you basically, well, I won't go into the dark side of it, but suffice it to say that they had a fight on their hands. I'll just leave it at that.
You try to generate a bunch of cash so you can buy up your own stock so that the other guy can't buy your stock. For the listeners out there, just watch the Michael J. Fox movie, The Secret of My Success, because that's the plot in the third act.
Well said. So what that meant for me is I was suddenly a guy without a job. And the good news is that most of my team, they just basically wrapped into BioShock 2, right? So they had the team up in Novato, they basically just went, you know what? How don't you all come up here, right? And like I said, John Chowanek, who was going to be my EP on the project, eventually became studio head for 2K Novato. And as the rest of the team went up there and excelled as you would expect they would. And eventually some of the others moved on. I know that the lead engineer ended up at Sledgehammer and so forth, but that's fine. But yeah.
Just out of curiosity, did you already have a rough idea of what kind of project you were going to be working on with that team?
Well, it was Darkness 2. We were going to do the sequel to Darkness. And
yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, we know exactly what we're going to do. We didn't. Yeah. We hadn't worked on the concept work yet. We were literally, that was the thing we were going to start doing as soon as we put boots on the floor.
You're right. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. And so, long story short, I became the vice president of special projects and started getting assigned to doing effectively biz dev work. Right. So my job became, I would go to other studios and evaluate the status of a project, write a report on it and things that need to be done to correct problems and report to Christoph. Or they considered buying up some of the THQ assets when THQ imploded. I was the guy they sent down to have those conversations and make recommendations on what to and not to consider buying. So that is what I did for about a year. They offered me the 2K Czech studio to go over and run 2K Czech, the Mafia team. So
okay.
I turned them down. Not that the studio was bad. I actually really liked those guys. And I was sent to deep dive on the studio. I generally gave positive reports on it, even though the project was in trouble. I liked the team. But the problem is the team was in Brno, not Prague. And if you've ever been to Brno, I apologize if anybody is from that area and hears me say this, but I will say that it was not really a place I would want to live. Eastern European semi-industrial.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
It did not appeal to me. I will say that the best meal I had in town was at McDonald's.
Ooh, yeah, I can definitely see that happening.
So, and maybe that's just my sensitive American sensibilities. I don't know. But it was certainly not true in Prague. Prague was amazing. I loved it. Yeah. And I would, in a heartbeat, if the studio was in Prague, I would have gone there, and that would have been a different story. But so I turned it down. And, did that for about a year. And it was clear that, I'm frankly being very underutilized, and biz dev is not my thing. And so I was like, it's time, and so I left and I didn't leave. I started talking to other places about this while I was still doing this job. Talked to EA. EA made me an offer to spin up a studio in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which would have, I think, been the beginning of their what would have eventually become the beginning of their mobile group. But that I didn't want to go back to EA at that point. It sounded good, but then I got an offer from Namco. And the Namco offer was one of those classic things that sounds too good to be true and turns out to be. They basically said to me, look, we want to be a top 5 studio, a top 5 publisher in 5 years. And we're committed to this plan. So we want you to come in and be our production director, and run production for all of our NBGA studio. I'd report to their VP of development, or the SVP of development, Roger Hector, who is one of the most genuinely nice people I've ever met. You've interviewed him, you know how nice he is.
Oh yeah.
And so I interviewed with him, and I'm like, I'm taking this job. This guy's great. I love this place. They seem committed. I'm in. Was there 6 weeks before the head of studios for North America was fired, replaced by a guy in Japan. And the guy in Japan's like, I want to get out of the console business. So start twilighting everything. And I'm like, what the hell? And so it went from, let's figure out our path forward, to reclamation project in about 6 weeks.
That's insane.
It is insane. Now, strangely, if you look at the history of Namco, it is literally a litany of that. They're like, hey, we're doing a thing. No, we're not doing a thing. We're doing a, no, we're not going to do that thing. No, we're not doing that thing. So I probably should have seen it coming if I'd done my homework well enough, but I was really convinced. And I liked everybody there. I'm still friends with all of them. I mean, even Iwai-san, who was the COO, love that guy. He went off to Nexon, and he's a great dude. Roger's amazing. I mean, I've made very good friends there and had really good relationships there. It was a great experience. There were good teams, and I'm very proud of what I accomplished there, despite the fact that it was 18 months, right? I had a legacy project that was in real trouble by the name of, it became named Enslaved, which was the Ninja Theory game. And it was in really real trouble. I actually removed the EP from the project and took direct control of the project briefly, and then found a new EP to take over. But it was definitely in trouble. They're a great studio. I don't want to in any way badmouth Ninja Theory. They're amazing. Some of the most creative people I've ever seen. But they were really struggling with, they had the basic idea down, this incredible story, but they didn't really have a game wrapped around it yet, right? The fighting system wasn't a fighting system. It was just a press X to win, and then you move on to the next story beat. They had no branching. They had no exploration. They didn't have all that skill tree stuff. That was stuff we helped them add. Range combat wasn't a thing. I mean, there's a ton of evolution that we worked with them on. And that was really one of those good examples of working with an external developer that was very proud and really you needed to be very careful with how you were hands off, hands on. And so, it was a lot of gentle nudging, but firm nudging to say, hey, we've got to do these things. And because of the nature of the contract, we didn't really have the ability to enforce it so much as nudge and coerce. But we built a good relationship and it worked out. And we ended up with a good team on our side working with them. Obviously, they're a very talented team, and I'm very proud of what the game ended up as. Amusing. I think I mentioned this to you before. It ended up getting not one, but 2 publications naming us the best game nobody had ever heard of. Because not long before we shipped, they pulled my entire marketing budget, every single penny. It was a new IP launched in October with 0 marketing. It was just like, there it is.
Now, I guess I have to go back to the statement that they were getting out of the console business.
Mm-hmm.
So Namco, at this point, it's still Namco. It's not Namco Bandai yet.
No, it is Namco Bandai Games America, NBGA.
Okay. And so if they're getting out of the console business, the arcade business, I guess, was still around at this point. It still is.
It is.
To a certain extent. But what was going to be the function of the Namco side of the business, if not console gaming?
Mobile. They wanted to lean mobile. They had caught the mobile bug, and they were like, we're just going to do that now. And they had an entity over in Santa Clara doing the mobile side of the business. And so their big plan was get out of console, lean into mobile, call it a day. That didn't work for them either, by the way. But whatever.
No.
So yeah, I mean, it became, like I said, a reclamation project. We had other projects in development. So this is a funny story. We had another game in development called Dead to Rights Retribution.
Yeah.
And when I came on board, literally the first thing I did was tried to kill it.
Okay. Please elaborate on the why and how.
I will. So I tried to kill the project because the project, without pointing too many fingers, I'll simply say that I did not see a path where that would become a profitable game. It was already a fair amount of investment in it, but it felt like we were throwing good money after bad. And so I wrote, I got up in front of the executive team, the Japanese executive team, and I presented them the weirdest deck I've ever presented in my life. Okay. I presented a deck that was basically, here are 3 scenarios, all of which you lose money in. You can cut bait and lose this much money. You can stick with the plan and lose more money, or you can double down and probably lose even more money, but maybe lose a little less money if it goes well. And they basically went, we're going all in. And so they added some additional personnel to it and added some resources to it and added some money to it. And, well, we know what the result was.
Now, okay, so I'm trying to, so you're coming in, you've got these legacy projects running at different stages of development. Without the game being complete, what were for you at that time warning signs that a game was not going to come together?
It's a very good question. And there's obvious stuff and then there's subtle stuff, right? One of the challenges is that so when you look at a game, every game has an identity, a heart of the game that is sort of the essential kernel of the gameplay that represents what makes this game what it is, right? And if that heart is good, even if the trappings around it are questionable, you can survive, right? Best example, my favorite example is the original Destiny. When the original Destiny shipped, the heart of the game, the moment-to-moment gameplay was very satisfying. And everything around it was very questionable, as very well known, right? But it survived because that heart was good, right? Dead to Rights Retribution, that heart was not very good. The shooting wasn't great. The melee wasn't great. The feel of it wasn't very good, and it felt like we were a long way off from getting it to where it felt good. And more importantly, the developer thought we were smoking crack and thought it was the best game ever created on the history of the world and didn't want to hear any shit about it.
Oh, now was this an outside studio or was it in-house?
It was an outside studio. I believe the name of the studio was Volatile Games.
Gotcha.
And yeah, it was. I don't want to disparage the people who worked hard on the game. It's just it didn't feel like it was coming together, and we didn't have a relationship where we felt like we could make the fundamental changes necessary. And so, I had an EP that I assigned to this game, and we had very frank conversations. It's like, look, man, this isn't gonna get better. So, and I'm like, do what we can do, sort of thing. And so we basically would drill into what we felt we could do to make it better. And there are things that they did that I think made it a better game than it was. I'm proud of what we did to make it better, but ultimately it did not make it a great game. It made it an okay game. And it didn't do particularly well, especially since also it had no marketing. The other one that was work in progress, another reclamation project, was Splatterhouse. Splatterhouse was another of those troubled things where there was a external studio that had been hired to do this game, and then that external studio started to fall apart, and effectively Namco bought them? I'm not sure that's the right way to put it. Basically blew up the studio, but hired back some of the horde of the team and then reformed a little studio to try and finish the game. It was very weird. And that was what I was handed. I was like, okay. And so a lot of trips down to Carlsbad and, trying to find ways to kind of find that magic for the game. But again, it was a game that was in a situation where we didn't have any choice except find a way to finish the game, find a way to get it out the door. And so much like Dead to Rights, we found a way to get it out the door. I will freely admit that, I leaned my time into Enslaved because it was the one that I could point at and say, of these games, and we also had a Wii cooking game and, and a Pac-Man party game in development. We had a number of projects, but Enslaved was 100% the one that we had invested the most in because it was a very expensive investment, and that I felt had the most potential if we could lean into it and get it right. And so, we tried to get the best out of every one of those, but in candor, both Splatterhouse and Dead to Rights were effectively, let's find a way to get it to be as good as it can be, but let's not try to do a major retrofit here. Let's get it to be the best it can be and get it out the door.
Understood. Now,
keep in mind that it, this is all under the auspices of knowing that we're all Walking Dead, right? So you have to keep in mind that we're all doing this knowing that there's nothing beyond, right? There's no future, right? And actually, I'll say this because it's something I'm very proud of. when it finally got to the end, we got all these projects out the door, and we're now basically getting shut down. I called all my contacts in the industry in the Bay Area, and I put together a job fair on site at the Namco building.
Oh, wow.
I got more companies to show up than we had employees.
That's impressive.
I was very proud of that. And so we took over the cafeteria at the building we were in, which is a big cafeteria, and they set up tables and put together a job fair, and it was all the big ones and the little ones, from the EAs down and the Sonys and everybody else down to the little shops that were in the Bay Area. And basically all those people found jobs. And I'm very proud of the fact that, I was able to at least accomplish that, knowing what we had faced. So, but anyway, it was sad, but it was it was us trying to do the best we can with the hand we were dealt, right? And
yeah,
that was, that's what we did. So
wow. Now, the Enslaved project, you said it was the one that they had put the most money into.
Yes. Well, Ninja Theory was a company that was expensive because they already had success with Heavenly Sword and, their other projects. And so it was not cheap, right? We invested a ton of money into Ninja Theory to get this top-notch game. They invested a bunch in all the motion capture. They had Andy Serkis, and who, by the way, that dude's amazing. Just freaking amazing dude. I did not meet him. But I'm just looking at the work that he did, because I looked at all the oh my God, that guy's incredible. Anyway, but yeah, Andy Serkis, they hired him to do all this, all fully mocapped. It was exquisitely done, and a really talented creative team, but it was an expensive project. And so, I also knew that was our biggest bang for the buck. If we could make that game great, then that could be the thing that moved the needle and made the difference for us. And ultimately, it was a great game. I mean, Metacritic, I think 87, 88, something like that.
Yeah, it's very high rated. Yeah.
It's a good game. I mean, it's a game that I have played through more than once just because it's a great game. And, I can't say that of every game, I've made. So. So anyway, it was, it was a tough span of time with Namco, sort of because of the nature of how that went down. But, like I said, you do what you got to do. And so we persevered and put that team together to sort of execute that. And, I brought in people that I'd worked with in the past. I mean, my EP from Tomb Raider, Matt Gazenda, pulled him over, pulled over, Ricky White, pulled over just a bunch of people that I'd worked with in the past to sort of come and join me here, despite the fact that they, then had to go find other jobs. Gazenda, by the way, was one of the guys at Crystal who worked on Legacy Kane and all that stuff, and now I think runs Gunfire Games, if I know correct. Cool. So good dude. Go ahead.
I was going to ask. So, at the job fair, did you find a job? Your next job at the job fair?
Good question. So no, because I wasn't trying to. I was worried about them. I wasn't worried about me. Should have been worried about me, but whatever. I'm not that smart. And so at the time, I was just worried about them. And so after that all wrapped up, I started shopping around and got, remember I told you this is the decade of pain. I got set up by a former employee of mine at Crystal Dynamics, who she used to be the recruiter. She connected me with with a COO from a company that was not in the games business, but wanted to be.
This has worked out well for you once before.
Yes, and I'm a slow learner. So I interviewed with this individual, and he basically said, I've got a budget, I've got $5 million, and all I'm interested in is a runway where you can get revenue, not even necessarily profitability immediately. I just want revenue within 18 months to 2 years. And I'm like, I can do that. And it's all mobile. He wanted a mobile focused studio. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And so I cut a deal. And so I spun up a studio from whole cloth. I hired mostly people I'd worked with before. So I pulled in, one of the designers I worked with on Kid Chameleon, and people I worked with at Namco, and people I worked with at SSI. And I mean, it was literally with a handful of new people, but a lot of people I'd worked with in the past. And, it was 20 people in a little studio in Santa Clara. And spun up this entity. We named ourselves Fierce Wombat Games. Still got the logo on the wall. One of the best logos I've ever seen. A little samurai wombat. I mean, come on, man, that's awesome. And we had a very specific angle that we were going to take. Our entire plan was to take board game IP and take them to mobile. Nobody was doing this at the time. And so I started reaching out to my contacts because, remember, I'm a board gamer. So I reached out and I contracted with Fantasy Flight Games, which is one of the top board game manufacturers in the world. I had a dialogue started with Games Workshop, but we didn't pull the trigger on that because they were already beginning to catch fire. I had a deal with Fantasy Games Unlimited, which is an old tabletop company. And I even had Steve Jackson on the line to jump on board. He basically wanted to wait for a proof of success. So he's like, get me a game out the door and then we'll talk, but I'll hold. And, because we had a good dialogue. So we're off. We've got 2 projects from Fantasy Flight that we start working on. And
which games?
So one of them was a game called Red November, which is basically a sort of a goofy game where you're playing guys in a submarine, like gnomes in a submarine, and you're all trying to escape because it's basically on fire, and you have to cooperate, but you can sort of be competitive as well, and you can try to be the guy that escapes in the the little escape hatch. And lets everybody else rot. It's a hilarious game, and it was intended to be that way. And then the other one was a miniatures game that they were working on at the time called Dust. And so we signed a deal for both of those, and we started working. And this one won't take long because that company died less than a year after it was born. But the long story short form of that is, we got about 7 months in, and we've actually got Red November to a playable state. So it's come together. We're not ready to publish. We would plan to publish in a few months after that, but it was on schedule. It was coming along. We had Dust in early prototype stage. And the COO takes me to the dinner party with the CEO of the company that we're a subsidiary of. And at that dinner party, I come to the realization that the CEO was not aware of us, that we were being run as a skunk works, and that the COO did not have permission. And so at the dinner party, the CEO was like, so what's your arc look like? When do you expect to become profitable? I was like, well, we expect to ship our first product in about 3 months. I expect profitability probably 4 to 6 months past that. And I basically laid out our arc for him, and he basically said nothing. And 2 weeks later, they showed up with the HR people to say, "You're out," and that was it.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So it was blindsided to the nth degree. Lots of lessons to be learned there about do your homework and dig into that stuff. But I genuinely did not see that one coming because, the sort of deal we had was explicit. I've got this much money for this much runway. I didn't realize that he was wrong. He was lying. Oh,
Jesus.
So all of a sudden, bam, we're done. We're blown up. All those people who are all friends of mine, all are now unemployed. That was a dark time.
Oh my goodness.
So
how do you even where was this studio? Where was it located?
It was in Santa Clara, California. On Winchester Boulevard, up in a little, office space on the third or fourth floor of that office building overlooking the road. And it was a remarkably talented little team that had a ton of potential that just never got to be realized because we literally had the rug pulled out from under us.
Oh, that's painful.
There's no guarantee we would have got it right. I think we still had a ways to go. We still had some, interesting ideas, but we will never know.
Now, quick question, because I should have asked this, but was there any conversation while you were still at Namco of you moving over into the mobile section of the company?
There was, but I didn't have expertise in it, and frankly, I didn't know if I really wanted to. Mobile was something that was interesting, but I had serious, and still do, have serious reservations about the mobile space as being, I'll be blunt. I have made arguments to my Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences friends that mobile games is an oxymoron. Because in general, and there are obviously far more exceptions now than there were at that time, but a lot of games are less game and more addiction mechanic, right? It's got less to do with gameplay and more to do with how can we get you to stick around and click buttons and or give us money. Hopefully give us money. I mean, it's a weird business. It's a business where 99% of the revenue comes from 1% of the players. That's very strange, right? And even when I was doing Fierce Wombat, we were entirely going to go down the path of what is called premium mobile games. So it was going to be paid, not free to play. The intent was, you're going to spend $6, you get the game. We might do expansions or add-ons, and that would be great, but we were not going to use the traditional mobile model. And so, I did talk about it with them, and I even actually went over there and had those dialogues, but it wasn't a fit for me. And I knew it, and they knew it. I don't think they really wanted me over there either. I think they would have taken me if I'd said I wanted to, but it wouldn't have been a good fit. And they were very kind and very polite, as you would expect, but it just wasn't the right move. So it was the right move to go on from there, just not the right move to go where I went. So
okay,
anyway.
I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yep. Get some sleep.
Yeah,
sir.
I'm sorry. It's a little after 2 a.m. now, so
you need to get to bed.
That concludes part 4 of our interview. Check back in soon for part 5, the grand finale, where Graeme will take us deep inside NetherRealm Studio, home of Mortal Kombat. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Have fun. I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.